Welcome to Module 1, Lesson 3, Winners and Losers. Today we're going to start talking about the economic factors of production. There are three things that we need in order to produce things. They include land, which also includes natural resources like water and minerals and things like that, labor, manpower, and capital, which not only includes financial backing but also bricks and mortar buildings, machinery, stuff like that. If we don't factor in technology, resources pretty much remain the same, and labor and capital only accounted for about 10 to 20% of growth. So how does technology affect these things? Well, one of the things we see is the ability to get our natural resources or use our natural resources through technology. So we have better mining facilities. We have we have fracking and things like that. We have more efficient machinery that allows us to use the natural resources to more efficiently, more effectively, and cut back on how much we use. With labor, it's really easy to see how technology has increased the ability for us to produce more per person. So any kind of machine that helps us, if you even look at the transition from the original assembly line where moving assembly line where men were stationed and machinery moved along, but the men did the work. Most of those jobs previously done by people have been replaced by robots and machines and things like that. And with capital, we have more better more effective machinery, we have better building materials, cheaper and better building materials, we have the ability to fund things more quickly. All you have to do is look at a crowdfunding kind of a deal and you can see how that would affect production. So technology really does boost our ability to use these three factors. There's a thing called subversive technology, and sometimes technology will disrupt or eliminate the need for um, certain technologies. It will change societies. Uh, it can be. We have to remember that technology itself doesn't have a good is not good or bad. It can be used for good or bad purposes. For instance, in the book, Volti talks about TNT or dynamite, which can be used for good purposes, such as dynamiting rock in order to be able to build tunnels, roads, stuff like that. But it also can be used for a bad purpose, such as blowing up a building with people inside, and so that's a bad use of the technology. Sometimes the bad effects of a technology aren't obvious. It takes a long time to see how a technology may have damaged the societies and industries. So, for instance, the automobile and transportation technologies really allowed people to move out of cities into suburbs, which meant that a lot of cities had no the only people who could live in cities were either the very rich or the very poor. If you could afford to live outside of a city, you would, because back at the turn of the 1900s, cities were not, they were overcrowded, they were dirty, so you wanted to get out of that. The people left were the people who usually couldn't afford to move out, so you had poverty, you had um, uh, buildings that were not taken care of, slums, that kind of stuff. So transportation technology disrupted how people lived in cities. One of the things that he points out within the book is the Yururant. And the Yururant were an Australian tribe, and the social structure was based on stone axe heads. The axe head itself, what happened was when you were transitioning from boyhood into manhood, part of that would be to make your own stone axe, and you would fashion the stone and make the axe, and that was a symbol that were now a man. So the stone axe head, was not just a tool; it was also a status symbol, and it also and only men, who were the only people who were allowed to have axes, to own axes, could trade and participate in other um, social functions. Well, along came missionaries, and they looked at these folks and they said, wow, they're so far behind the times. Why are they still using stone axe heads? Let's give them metal axes. So they gave everybody, including women and children, metal axes. And unfortunately, what happened was that gave everybody the same status as the men who previously. So it undermined the social structure of the Urant and destroyed it. Sometimes technology can be subversive. It can change things in industries, and sometimes we want to stop a technology or halt a technology, and we want to subvert it. In the book, he talks about the packaged kitchen. After World War II, there was a huge housing boom, and it was very difficult for people to keep up with the construction. So this guy came up with this idea of a packaged kitchen, which basically was, we'll put a kitchen together as a module, and then we'll ship it to the construction site, and all they have to do there is just hook up the connections, the electrical and plumbing connections, and then the carpenters just sort of attach it to the rest of the house. Well, if you were a contractor, or a carpenter, or an electrician, or a plumber, and you're looking at this, and what does this mean? This means that you're spending less time, which means that you're making less money. So they said, well, we would hook it up, but first you have to take it apart so we could put it back together in order to hook it to the rest of the house. So the idea of the module, that packaged kitchen, was useless. Um, and what happened was is the guy went out of business. But we see this technology is sort of resurfaced again in modular homes today. Another example he gives is the mechanized silk thread machine that this guy came up with. And he says, why should we sit there and wait for people to spin silk from the silkworm cocoons by hand? I have this great machine, and it really works well. Well, and they didn't want to see a whole bunch of people being put out of work. So the Chinese, who controlled the raw material, the cocoon, said, oh, sure, you could use your machine, but either they wouldn't sell them the raw material, the cocoons, or they would sell it at such a high price, it would make any financial gain from the machine useless. So the guy they subverted that technology. Of course, we don't have people doing hand silk, making the silk by hand anymore. Again, they delayed it, but they didn't necessarily prevent it. The Luddites, now one of the things you have to understand is that in Britain, at the turn of the 19th century, the early 1800s, the situation was that Napoleon was trying to take over continental Europe, and he had taken over huge chunks. The British sort of saw you don't trade with your enemies, so what happens is that a lot of their trade that they did with the continent was cut off. And they really weren't trading much with the United States because we had just sort of said bye-bye, we don't like you anymore, and they really didn't like us either. So they had very restricted trading opportunities. Not only that, but a lot of the money was going to the war effort, to fighting Napoleon. So there was a lot of economic problems, and people wanted to keep their jobs. Well, on the other hand, we have British textile companies coming out with these new spinning machines and looms. And they're saying, well, we could do this with untrained, unskilled labor, easier, faster, but we'll be putting a whole bunch of people out of work. And people, when they're faced with going out of work, get a little upset. So we started seeing protests. And a guy named Ludd actually was he got so mad and so frustrated, he smashed the machine. And this attitude sort of spread throughout Britain, and they started more people started attacking the machines as well as the company owners. And the riots got so bad that they actually had to call out the military to put them down. So today we call people who are resistant to change Luddites. Okay, so who wins and who loses? In the book, Volti states technological changes often lead to the restructuring of power relations, the redistribution of wealth and income, and an alteration of human relations. Let's take a look at how this applies to the textile industry here in the South. So originally, the textile industry, you know, um, the industry of it, the machines, all that stuff was done in the North. Even though the cotton was grown down here, the North had the industry. Um, Partly because of water, partly because of the fact that the weather in the North, you didn't have to stop work in the summer when you had all kinds of humidity and heat, which would affect the process. Well, along comes air conditioning. Okay, so in the South, if you have air conditioning, now you're controlling the climate. You don't have to worry about humidity and that kind of stuff. So people said, well, why would we want to ship all of our raw material north? Why don't we just, you know, create factories here and manufacture textiles in the South? And that's what they did. And there was a huge textile industry. And not only was it a huge textile industry, but the nature of the business was that whole families worked for places like Springs and things like that. And they worked there their entire lives. Uh, and that, but what happened was along came cheaper transportation and better communication technologies, which allowed them to ship these textile jobs overseas. It was a lot cheaper to have people overseas make clothes and things like that, and to ship it to the United States than it was to actually have American workers do it. And actually what happens today is that even though a lot of cotton is grown in the South, it's all shipped overseas so that they could make the clothes so that they can ship it back here. So how do we see the changes? Well, we see changes in power relations. We see changes in who holds the power. The companies, the workers. Okay, the workers lost power because the companies, through mechanization and things like that, and through technology, um, we see a shift in power from workers to owners. We see redistribution of wealth and income. Originally, we saw geographically, we saw the wealth in the north, then it came to the south, and then we shipped it overseas, and now people overseas are becoming wealthier at the expense of American workers. But also we see changes in, how do people here who lost their jobs or who never had the opportunity to work for the industry. We see places like Chester where it was a huge industry becoming depressed. Okay, and they have to revamp. And of course, human relations. That idea of a family type atmosphere at work no longer exists. You don't go to a job and work there until you retire anymore. Now it's what do I have to offer you? What will you pay me for kind of relation. And that's, it's different. It doesn't necessarily make it better or worse. So we always have to think about with technological innovation, who wins and who loses. So next class, this is what we'll be doing. Influences of technological change in public and private sectors. Why technology is not effective when dealing with social issues. Very, very important. The technological fix and technocracy.